Thank you, everybody.
And then maybe, Venerable Robina, we could offer the mandala to just get things started correctly.
Very auspicious. So what we're going to do is, if we don't know the Buddhist cosmological view of the universe, which is quite different from ours, if we don't know that one, then we just think of all the marvelous things in our world. This is really the point. All the marvelous things that make people happy, we pile them all up and imagine offering them to the Buddha as a request. Imagine offering to Buddha Tara as a request for the teachings.
And Robina, did you want to sing the mandala prayer? Your voice is better than mine.
I mean, you're the director. You can sing.
Okay, then.
It's auspicious because you're doing it on behalf of the center and the students requesting, so it's good you do it.
Okay, then.
Until we train James Butler to be our
baritone.
Our baritone umze. Yes, when we start having the center back again, we'll do that. We're going to start a choir.
Sashi ki jugshing meto tramri ramlingji ni degen padi sangye jingdu mikde uai drokunam dagjingla chopasho. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Radna Mandala Kam Nirya Tayami.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Wonderful. So now I can sing this next little prayer. I'll do that one. And this is just sort of putting us in the right direction, as always, stating our motivation, but also reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings and so on. So we're saying, I'll say it in English a bit more, I'll add a few words. So we're saying, until we become enlightened, we will never stop relying upon the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And so by the virtuous karmic seeds we drop into our bank vault by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye cherang soke chongnam la jancho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye cherang soke chongnam la jancho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. Okay. So I think in those course notes I prepared for you, there's a little teaching in there from Lama Yeshe, the psychology of Tantra. So let's look at that, okay? I mean, let me get Lama Yeshe's, let me get the notes, the course notes. I'm not prepared for them. I wonder where I put them. I know where they are. Won't take a second. So like I said last night, Lama Yeshe, from the very beginning, he's somehow seeing us crazy modern people, in case mostly white people at the time, when he first met foreigners in the late 60s, mostly Americans, Australians, Europeans, and mostly kind of either Jewish or Christian, I don't think he had many Muslim students or African American or African or Asian, all these hippies. He somehow could, because I mean, he's wise, these holy beings, because they've removed the delusions from their mind. They're crystal clear, they can see. This is the whole point the Buddha is saying about the potential of our mind. The delusions in our mind cloud us, blind us from seeing reality. What the delusions cause is for us to see what we want, so we make up things. But when you've got wisdom, you see things as they are, so you see the minds of others. This is something fundamental. So he can see very clearly that because we're in the modern culture, which is super or attachment oriented, attachment to the sensory objects. We have an abundance, don't we, of sensory objects. But also we have an abundance of dissatisfaction. As Lama Zopa says, dissatisfaction is the main pain of the modern world. Dissatisfaction, never being happy with what we are, with what we've got, with what we get, with what we see, with what we do, always dissatisfied. This is a function actually of attachment. We come born into this life programmed with so much attachment. And because attachment never can give you what you want, you think it does, you're always bumping up against brick walls, then you ending up getting more dissatisfied. I always remember my mother, a little girl, about food. I was really into my food, you know. She'd say, the more you get, the more you want. I'd hear it and try and understand. That's exactly the wisdom of the Buddha. That's the function of attachment. So we have this enormous dissatisfaction. And kind of the irony of attachment is that it causes us to create more things, because we think, well, now we'll do this one, now we'll have that one, now we will do a better one. If we were content, we'd still be like 10th century Tibetans. They're quite content with their dirt floors and their... But when you're dissatisfied, you keep creating more things, hoping that'll get you happiness. The advantage, of course, we can be intelligent and make wonderful things that people can use to benefit. That's good. But attachment is the energy that's completely destructive, totally primordially destructive. It's the basis of all the other delusions. And of course, as always we talk, this has got absolutely got nothing to do with the materialist model of the mind. It's a completely, profoundly different analysis of what suffering is and what its causes are, you know. The Buddha's analysis is attachment is the cause. And this is easy to hear it, but it's hard to see it in the mind, you know. Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You will never begin to understand it until you start doing the work inside, you know, being your own therapist. So Lama could see, though, because he could see that Tantra was very suitable for modern people, because the essence of the psychology of Tantra, and I want to talk to you about what Lama says, is that it utilizes attachment. So this is a very interesting concept that he felt that we modern people could understand, because we were so degenerate, so much attachment, so many attachment objects, drowning in kind of degeneration, you know. The idea of utilizing that energy and transforming it into something sublime, he somehow felt that we'd understand that. So he taught Tantra from the beginning, but not in a kind of complicated sense. As he said, Tantra's super technical. If you read the Tantric texts and commentaries, they're super, super advanced and technical and hard to comprehend. But Lama, being a marvelous Lama, a marvelous mentor, a genuinely realized being, had the ability, with his little English, with his astonishing English, though, to convey this to us. And I remember when I'd hear Lama Zopa teaching, I always get depressed, you know, the Lam Rim, and you're going to go to hell for 42 eons, and all of this talk. And then when Lama would come along, I'd just sigh with relief. It was like unbelievable. I couldn't tell you. I'm not even sure that if Lama Yeshe weren't there when I first met the Lamas, that I would even have stayed around. I mean, I knew it was my path, but Lama was the one who grabbed me. He hooked me. He got me by the scruff of my neck, you know. He has astonishing ability to express the concepts to us that in the way that we'd understand. So let me find the course notes, and I'll just quote Lama, you know. Dr. Nobuling Tara. There we go. Tablet. Let me see. I'm pretty sure I put that chapter in. There it is, Psychology of Tantra. Just a little bit, it's an excerpt from a couple of Lama's books. So, for example, these are excerpts from, a long excerpt from, and I don't say, how terrible, I think it's from The Bliss of Inner Fire. Okay, so yeah, so the real way to understand Tantra, therefore to understand Tara, and this whole approach, psychologically and philosophically, you have to understand it in the framework of the entire path, and it makes no sense otherwise. And that's why always, traditionally, the teachings that are given before, you know, we talk about Tantra, and by the way, I'm not a Tantric yogini, so, you know, think of it, I'm just sharing these ideas with you. You know, it's like I'm not becoming one of your lamas as a result of this. If you were serious Tantra, we'd be committing ourselves to each other, you know, but not in this case. I'm just sharing some knowledge from my lamas with you. So you can see even from the headings, if you just skim through it from page 4, you know, the psychology of Tantra. So Lord Buddha taught his path in many different levels according to the needs and capabilities of the different sentient beings. You know, his most advanced teachings given in his esoteric aspect as Vajradhara. So in his esoteric Vajradhara, and known as Tantrayana or Vajrayana. Tantra is the quickest vehicle to Buddhahood, the full enlightenment. So the only way to understand Tantra, because the essence of Tantra is to utilize attachment, the only way to understand attachment is you've got to go to the earlier stages and understand the mind. And then even before you do that, you've got to understand karma. So we need the classic teaching is you have to give a brief summary of the 3 principal aspects of the path. So that's another way of presenting the 3 scopes, like I like to call them: junior school, high school, university. and then postgraduate, which is Tantra. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche very politely, respecting the lineage, would quote the very first level of teachings where we learn about karma, the fundamental teachings that without which Buddhism would just collapse into a heap of utter incoherent nonsense. The view that you learn this in junior school, the first level, as Lama Zopa would call it, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. It's the first step. We learn about the mind. We learn about how every millisecond of what we think and do and say produces the person we become. We learn about the law of karma, which is learning about ethics, about morality and ethics in great detail. What is an action? What is a negative action? What is a positive action? What defines it? It's very precise details. And if we have a minimum of this, we've got a good basis for this, for the development of our life and our practice. Because for the Buddha, the law of karma runs the universe, It's a natural law. No one made it up. It's not coming from a creator. Buddha doesn't assert a creator. He's not a creator. It's not punishment, not reward. It's a natural law that runs our minds, within which our minds run. Put it like that. So we have to learn about, so the first principal aspect of the path is to develop renunciation. So what are we giving up? We're giving up suffering and its causes. So in junior school, in the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability, we learn about how to stop creating further suffering by stop using our body and speech, doing negative actions. And a negative action is one that harms, the grossest level is a negative action is one that harms another based upon some neurotic delusion like attachment or anger or something. So that's the first level of practice. We learn to control the servants of the delusions, or the slaves, as Lama Zopa says. So having harnessed our body and speech, which you become a pretty nice person by that point, subdued, stable, well-behaved, don't harm others, and in your own mind, you're kind of really you're getting to know what's going on. You now go to the next level and practice the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability, and I like to call it high school. And these two together is the wisdom wing, and that nice analogy that a bird needs two wings. And this is the Hinayana part of the path. So if you graduated there in the second level in high school, in the middle scope, you now get to the mind itself, which is what drives the body and speech. We first control the body and speech, and now we can get to the mind and unpack and unravel the mind and start to identify the delusions, the neuroses in this particular model of the mind that's unique to the Buddha. So here we learn there are thousands of neurotic states of mind that causes suffering and causes to harm others. But Buddha narrows them all down very nicely and happily to three toxic emotions. The root delusion that clings to the misconception of a separate self. Then the attachment, the bottomless pit of attachment to get what that self wants. And then the panic attack of aversion, anger, annoyance, irritation, frustration, despair, depression when it doesn't. And all this builds up in us. So these three poisons, they sound so cute and simple. You don't go to your therapist, oh, I've got the three poisons. So you just shut up and go home, it's not serious enough. But these are the essence of all the other delusions. So by understanding these three, I tell you, you become profoundly aware of your own mind, and then you can then you can understand other people. So here, the effective ego grasping is the root delusion, but in day-to-day life, effectively, attachment is the cause of suffering. So even attachment, the way Buddha refers to it, he has a vast view of attachment and the results of attachment in the way he describes the entire universe, So as we know, the whole universe is divided, like I mentioned last night, I think, the universe is divided into enlightened beings and ordinary beings. And ordinary beings are divided into those who realize emptiness and those haven't. So those who realize emptiness are called superior beings. Wait a minute, ordinary, superior, I'm a bit confused now, but it's Buddha and everybody else. And then among all the everybody else, you've got superior beings who realize emptiness and those who haven't. And we're in samsara, And then all of those lot are divided into three different levels, different realms of existence, which refer to different states of mind. So from the Hindu perspective, you've got the formless and form realms, these dudes, these amazing beings who've gone to such subtle levels of their mind in the deepest of absorption in samadhi. And for them, that's liberation. Buddha says, nope, sorry, further, there's more rubbish to get rid of. And that's where he diverged in his own direction when Buddhism started 2,500 years ago. But also now at a grosser level, you've got a couple of those, form and formless. Then you've got the desire realm, and this is where we are. So it's very helpful to even understand this in order to understand it's a product of attachment. So we can take the view, which is Buddha's view, of course, that our mind is beginningless, which is nutty as it sounds. We're all totally convinced it has to begin somewhere. We keep looking back for this needle in a haystack. Ha ha, there's the beginning. It's meaningless. You cannot have a beginning. And that we have that view So we believe it so totally because we have ego grasping. It's one of the functions, one of the mistakes of this ignorance that sees that there must be something permanent and uncaused. So Buddha has great philosophical discussions with all the creator concept. He says it's not viable, you know, and also with the view of a permanent uncaused soul. No concept like that in Buddhism. So attachment, desire is another word for attachment. It's a neurotic state of mind as opposed to a virtuous. And this is the fundamental thing we have to get familiar with if we're trying to be Buddhists. And most of us don't study this, so we don't really understand it. It's a great pity because we can't be proper Buddhists if we don't. Is that there are deluded states of mind and virtuous states of mind. And the virtuous states of mind for the Buddha are at the core of our being. They're intrinsic. They define us. They are who we really are. And finally, when we're Buddha, they're developed to perfection. And the other rubbish is gone. It's adventitious. This is the shocking view that Buddha has, radical view, you know. So attachment is not just, you know, oh, I like chocolate cake. It's profoundly more subtle than that, more pervasive, more deep. So if our mind is beginningless, then we have to deduce that our mind existed before this planet, which is hilarious. Even that our mind existed before this body is hilarious to us, you know, because we're convinced we track ourselves back to mummy, daddy, the monkeys, or we track ourselves back to God. They're the two options, aren't they? Not for the Buddha. You've got to track your mind back. It's not physical. It's a continuity of mental moments that keeps going back and back and back and back and back. And as nutty as it sounds, and even as I say it, it feels peculiar. You can't find the first moment. Necessarily, logically, you cannot. Because there can't be a first cause. The Christians have a very great philosophical discussion about this. Capital F and capital C even, first cause, and trying to show how there can be a first cause. The Buddhists disagree. Buddha disagrees. Not logical, not viable, not possible. Anyway, that's up to us when we study to see how that's true or not. And Buddha might be wrong. You've got to prove it. Yourself don't just swallow it whole. So anyway, you see, this is the thing. The Buddha's view of the mind doesn't refer just to us humans. It's most fascinating. It refers to every being in the universe. It's a model that covers the universe. I don't think Jung's psychology refers to the dogs and ants and monkeys. I don't think so. Buddha's does, and to the beings we can't see. All the Buddha's view of the universe is a result, is in the framework of how the mind is. All these realms of existence are products of the mind. They're all states of mind. So the predominance of anger is the cause of a type of rebirth, a type of experiential state called a hell realm. It's not just something made up by God where he sends you when you're naughty. Like Lama Yeshe says, hell is in some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. No, it is the creation of the tragic suffering minds of those beings. We create our own reality. They say the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas have such compassion for us. Forget about not realizing emptiness, but because we don't understand cause and effect. We're looking out there everywhere for the cause of my suffering and happiness. We're demented. Lama Yeshe would often say schizophrenic. Don't be insulted. It's right. This complete disconnect between who we are and what our mind does and the world and happiness out and suffering and happiness out there. So our mind goes back and back and back. So we can deduce, and we have to ask the question, well, that's interesting. What was a human birth? If they're states of mind, and this has been Buddha's view for many, for countless lifetimes. If these are states of mind, if human is a state of mind, what are its characteristics? Well, what characterizes a human mind aren't delusions. We share those with the monkeys and the ants and the dogs. They're lower realm states of mind. Attachment and delusions are lower realm states of mind. What defines a human is virtue. Because virtues are rooted in dependent arising, and dependent arising is the conventional way that things exist, which implies emptiness. So that's the advantage of a human mind. But how come we've all got these other ones too? Well, it's degenerate times. We share this planet with a bunch of apes, looking like a bunch of apes, having almost the same DNA, apparently. So what's this mean? So then for eons before this planet, they talk about eons, they're a bit vague sometimes with their numbers. They're very precise when it comes to the definition of anything like attachment to love. But when it comes to how long something is, it's called an arm length. That's very wonderful. Or a very long time, an eon, generalize an eon, So we have to logically deduce then, if Buddha's correct, that if before this planet, where was my mind? We have to ask that question. And if I had a human birth in the past, what was that human birth like if it wasn't on this planet? Was it on Mars? No, we're not discussing that. The karmic appearance we have of this universe is all the planets and the moon and the sun and the earth and all that business. That's our conventional reality, how we see things now. But the Buddha's view is your mind goes back and back. And if it goes back and back and human is a state of mind that has always existed, virtue and wisdom, then what did we look like then? Well, that was before this gross rebirth, they talk about this as a degenerate time. It was a human birth before this planet was much more subtle, was more like a God realm in the sense that we had subtle light bodies. So to understand this, we have to understand the Vajrayana. So we'll leap over to that for a second. The Vajrayana model of the universe is that the universe consists of trillions of minds, and then the matter of the universe is matter and minds, and that's it. Mind is not physical. Then the matter is made of the 4 elements. That's it. So the 4 elements, they can figure in different ways out there according to the karma of sentient beings. It's called environmental karma. So before this planet, a human birth, which was a good one, we could only access virtue. The delusions were imprinted there, but they were latent. Virtues prevailed. And because it was so much virtue, our physical energies weren't gross. We didn't have walking sewers. Our mind now is conjoined with a walking sewer, isn't it? Really gross, heavy bodies, you know. We didn't have, our 4 elements then were subtle. We had subtle light bodies. This is not meant to be fiction, by the way. This is truth. Buddha's not saying believe him. You've got to check out on it. Check it up yourself. You can prove he's right if you like, or prove he's wrong. It's up to you. So mine was more subtle. So human birth was a long time. You got enlightened very easily. But all the delusions were there. They were latent from before lives, from past lives. So attachment was there. And attachment gradually began to grow. It's like karma's like personal evolution, you know. It's just my way of talking. They don't write about like in the text like this. We can deduce it all based on all the bits and pieces. So the mind, the attachment was there and it began to grow, but gradually those rebirths became a little bit more degenerate. That means the mind, because in the Vajrayana model, as Lama Zopa says, in the Kala Chakra Tantra, they have these detailed descriptions of the intimate relationship between internal and external energy. So every time your mind is angry, for example, that programs your mind in anger, but because your mind is inextricably linked to all the different wind energies, this is the fundamental model of the Tibetan medical system, which is based on the Vajrayana. All your states of mind are coursing through these 72,000 subtle channels in your body, and your minds are connected, they say the mind rides on the winds. All our different states of mind have the different wind energies. So your Tibetan doctor will feel your pulses, and she'll feel the berserk imbalance of the certain wind energy that she knows related to your attachment, and that's why you're having panic attacks, you know. So as Lama Zopa says in the Kala Chakra Tantra, this intimate relationship between the internal and external. Internal is mind, external is the matter, the 4 elements. So, hang on a second. So, okay, here we go. Sorry, excuse me. So when the mind, let's say, is angry, that programs the mind in anger, but it pollutes the wind energies naturally because they're intimately linked, inextricably linked. So the wind energies get polluted, and that eventually causes you to be sick. Literal physical imbalance. And in the long term over many eons, it then creates the cause to have a certain type of imbalance in the elements. So, you know, from past killing karma, probably 1,000 lifetimes ago, all the people who lived in San Francisco when the latest earthquake was, whatever, the imbalance of the physical elements, that's not coming from God. It's not called an act of God, or it's not called natural law. It's natural. Sorry, it's not an act of God. That's heavy duty, blaming God for that. That's okay. There's no such thing like that. It's a natural law, and it's the result karmically of 1,000 lifetimes ago of all those people who collectively experienced the result of their past killing, and the elements start erupting, you know, or even just in general environmental karma is like that. Everybody's got, you know, you live in a certain place where the water's polluted. That's collective karma of all those people from their deluded mind, which pollutes the winds, which in turn impacts upon the external elements. So the entire universe is made by sentient beings, no creator up there. So back into the human birth before, attachment was still there. We hadn't got enlightened yet. And it began to grow. So it polluted the wind energies. And eventually we end up a human realm, you know, seamlessly from being subtle light bodies to slightly more gross. We end up on the planet looking like a bunch of apes. That's the human birth now, the best we can get. Looking like an ape, okay? And sharing the qualities of an ape. Not being rude about apes. So to understand Tantra and the deities, and I want to talk about that, how these deities manifest in subtle light bodies, we have to understand this model, which is the Vajrayana. It's quite a practical approach. It's very interesting, you know. So attachment is the cause of the problems. So the whole of the path, we can see it in terms of related to the levels of dealing with attachment. So the very first level, junior school, the entry level, the lowest scope of teachings, where we abide by the laws of karma, we know that Lord Buddha gives us about 10 little things to refrain from doing. The first 7 are the body and the speech, just 7 little baby things. I mean, when you learn to drive a car, you probably vow to not do about 420 things, and you internalize all of them. There's just 7 little baby things, 7 little babies, 3 of the body and 4 of the speech. And then the last 3 are just the beginnings, I would say, I put it that way, of Buddha working on the mind. He gets to start harnessing the energy of the 3 poisons in the beginning. So he gets us to stop doing actions driven by the 3 poisons, mainly the branch ones, attachment and anger. So he gets us to refrain from, jumping on everybody else's partner. He gets us to refrain from killing, which is usually driven by attachment or anger. He gets us to refrain from stealing, it's driven by, attachment. Gets us to refrain from bad-mouthing people, driven by anger. Gets us to refrain from just rabbiting on about nothing, driven by attachment. So he's getting us eventually to get to high school, to the middle school, where we work on the delusions themselves. We've got to control the servants first, the slaves of the delusions. But it's always to do with attachment. Attachment, this word is massive, primordial, vast in Buddhism. We don't use it like that. This word in our culture, we don't use it this way. It's this primordial, bottomless pit of dissatisfaction that then has the emotional hunger that is not because it's not satisfied, always wants something more. And then the first level of attachment dumps onto the objects of the senses that then exaggerates their deliciousness, exaggerates their role in making us happy, and then brings us incredible disappointment when we discover that our fantasy wasn't right, which is what brings more dissatisfaction. And so this is the pain of this modern culture, this modern world we live in, is the product of attachment. Look, especially where in the richer countries where you've got divine things. I mean, I remember Song Rinpoche. It's so wrathful. He's a manifestation of Haruka Chakra Zambara, and one of Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe's lamas, one of the high lamas back in the 70s. And he was so wrathful, he couldn't even look at him, He was very sweet and kind, but they had this wrathful aspect. And one time in one of our centers in England, like 100 of us are there, he was so, I can't tell you, he never raised his voice, but he looked at our offerings on the altar and he said, no, he looked at our different things, like our water bowls and our, the different ritual instruments we use, the different things we use. And he looked at them with such disdain and he said, you people have better things in your kitchen. And he's right. I mean, he's right. Who spends, $100 on a water bowl? We buy these ugly old brass things because we think we're supposed to have brass. It's all moldy. But who would drink out of a moldy brass, but you wouldn't give it to your dog? He's right, And he saw our tsog offering at the tsog pujas. And he said, you call those offerings? We have mountains of offerings. He was so heavy. Anyway, where was I? Attachment. So we are living in an attachment environment where for us in our normal, even if we're not rich, we can get anything we want at any time. We just press a button, you just press a button and Amazon will send it to you next day. It's like a miracle. This is the fruit of our generosity. There's no doubt it was amazing, but it's a product of attachment because attachment is never satisfied. So even the way we've got these marvelous objects, they're developed by intelligence. Dogs don't make divine fridges and houses. Birds do their best, 8 hours a day, trying to build their little house to get their girl. But look at us humans with our brilliant intelligence, our technical brilliance. That's intelligence, that's fantastic, but it's mixed with attachment. So we create things all the time, new things. Maybe this new fridge will make us happy and this new cup will make us happy, always dissatisfied. We can use it for the good, but we're looking at the suffering of it. It's a product of dissatisfaction. Attachment is what causes us. This super conceptual, busy creative mind is attachment, So we mix it with intelligence. We can use it to benefit others on the bodhisattva path. Marvelous. We use it to harm as well. We create clever guns and everything, So it's attachment that drives it. And it's our dissatisfaction. If we were very happy with the cup we had 20 years ago, why would we create another one? It's because we're dissatisfied. That's attachment. So attachment drives it's like in the nervous system of the entire universe, So Tantra, in Tantra, we are dealing with pleasure, as Lama says, not with pain. You must understand. The person who is qualified to practice Tantra is someone who can cope with pleasure, who can experience pleasure without going berserk. Lama would say that. This is the tantric personality. If a person is always miserable, Tantra does not work for them because there's no resource of pleasure to be utilized. I mean, this is so, as if I should know that Lama's clever, so insulting us, implying I know. But it's like unbelievable how Lama was able to say things, just it just like, you just want to weep with happiness when you read Lama, because he just gets it so simply. It's unbelievable. So the essence of Tantra, we're using pleasure. So often you hear that Tantra is transforming attachment. Yes, it's true, but the real point of Tantra is we're using the pleasure, the happy feelings that are triggered in our mind on the basis of contact with objects of attachment. So attachment is a theme that goes all the way through the practices, and I'm going to go through them, the 3 different levels of the 3 principal aspects of the path, getting to Tantra. But actually, exactly what Lama says, it's the pleasure, the happy feelings, and I need to describe this exactly to it, because we don't understand this. I'll describe it exactly according to Buddhist model of the mind, what pleasure is. That is what is being transformed in Tantra. So initially it's confusing, huh? It sort of sounds like you got permission to get happy. That's good. Oh, I'd like that. Pleasure. Thank you, you know. So what's it mean? Well, first we have to understand that. If you're transforming pleasure and pain, or attachment, let's say, and you learn about attachment back in high school, and you control the servants of attachment back in junior school, you've got to learn all that. Well, the iPad now, because my computer's not starting. I don't know why. So here I am on my iPad. I hope it works all right. Hang on a second. Okay, so I'll keep going. I've got to see myself. It's ridiculous. I don't want to see myself. Where's the general view? Here we go. Now that's better. Now I can see you all. Okay, good. Let's continue. So it's attachment. Pleasure is what is utilized, but attachment is the cause of it. So the very first stages, we have to control the servants of attachments, calm our body and speech down, stop harming others, stop jumping on every girl we feel like, stop shoving in the chocolate cake, begin to harness our crazy energy. And then we get to the high school, the second scope, the middle scope, and then we start to control the attachment itself. That's when we really become a Buddhist. We really start to unpack and unravel the mind and understand the mind. And we have to stop here now and start talking about the mind so we'll understand what the meaning of pleasure is and its relationship to attachment. It's so precise in Buddhist psychology. It's a delight, I tell you. Because we don't understand this, we do not understand Tantra. It's like a joke, okay? Okay, so in the Buddhist model of the mind, in the mental consciousness, they describe there are 3 categories of states of mind. The neurotic, deluded, ridiculous ones, which we know about, and then the positive, virtuous ones, like love and compassion and kindness and those. And then you've got what they call the neutral ones, but that's a bit misleading. So I call them the mechanics of our mind. And this is crucial to understand. We've got to understand what it means by a negative state, a positive state, and a neutral state, or a mechanic. And this is not how we talk in modern psychology. It sounds very moralistic. We don't like it. But a negative state of mind is the neurotic, distorted, delusion, exaggerated, disturbing, painful state of mind that Buddha happens to have found are not integral to who we are and can be removed. And the entire job of being a Buddhist is to remove the rubbish. The second lot are at the core of our being, the virtues, and why, and they are reasonable, valid states of mind. And why are they valid? Because they're in sync with dependent arising. And dependent arising is the way things exist. It's reality. The third lot are the mechanics. And that means, you know, you've got one called concentration, one called alertness, another called vigilance, another called discrimination, another called mindfulness, and not the way we put all these bells and whistles on it. It's simply that is simply referring to our capacity to remember what we're doing moment by moment. It's like short-term memory. As Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. So mindfulness, concentration, even intelligence, ability to put 2 and 2 together, alertness, vigilance, discrimination, and another one called feeling. These are all neither negative nor positive. They're neither the cause of happiness nor the cause of suffering. It's a question of how you use them. So if you're thieves need mindfulness. So you're got good mindfulness and good concentration and good discrimination. For example, discrimination is one of these always present states of mind that's working every millisecond that enables us to distinguish between this and that every second. You'd be insane if you didn't have this. Everybody needs that. The hawk diving into the water from half a mile away, getting its breakfast, can see exactly that fish and knows exactly that's the fish I want. These are all the mechanics of our mind. They're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So it's a question of how you use them. So feeling, surprisingly, feeling is in there. So what does feeling mean? It's not like we call it like an emotion, completely different. There are only three kinds of feeling we ever have. One is called happy or pleasant. One is called unhappy or unpleasant. And one is called neutral. When we forget about the neutral, they're real states of mind, real types of feeling. We're not interested in those here. So basically, these are two words for happiness and suffering. This is already powerful to understand, because when we think of happiness, we think of the divine boy. When we think of suffering, we think of the ugly cake that made us vomit. We are so addicted to the outside world being the cause of happy feelings or unhappy feelings that we think even they are the suffering and they are the happiness. That just shows how addicted we are to the outside world. So feeling is the mind. And you have a pleasant feeling through the mental consciousness. And of course, you have a pleasant feeling through the sensory consciousness. But it's the mind that experiences a feeling. A feeling can't be experienced by the physical. Not possible. Eye consciousness, tactile consciousness is that part of your mind that functions through the medium of the skin and the nerves, etc., whatever. But the body doesn't experience pleasure. The mind does. I can't get this to be clear enough for you to understand the Buddhist view. If you don't understand this, you're confused. So we all know we only want the pleasant feelings. We only want happiness. Happiness is, again, not the environment, not the boyfriend, not the family, not the things. They're the external objects that trigger a happy feeling or that trigger an unhappy feeling. They are a cause, but they're not the main cause. This is Buddha's crucial point. The main cause of my happy feelings over long term is as many moments of happy feelings I can count, is as many seeds from past virtuous states of mind. So a virtuous state of mind, like a moment of love, a moment of kindness, or a moment of generosity, which uses my body as well, they drop little virtuous seeds into my bank vaults, and they will ripen sometime in the future as moments of happy feelings. Literally happy feelings, the long-term cause of them is the past virtue, not the cake, not the thing out there. This is where the analysis we have in the materialist world is a complete disaster. It leads us up garden paths, you know. So we have happy feelings and we know we want them, and we know we don't want the unhappy feelings. So think about your life. We spend our lives pursuing happy feelings, actually. You'd even argue it's not even the boy, it's not even the cake that you're pursuing. You do pursue the object. Why? Because we believe when I get the object, I'll get a happy feeling. You're going to look at a boy who's very handsome to your eye consciousness. And then as soon as you touch him, you get an electric shock. I promise, honey, you won't live with him. I promise you will not leap into bed with him, because you'd rather die than have electric shocks. So only because that handsome boy triggers pleasant feelings when the eye consciousness sees that shape and color, and the ear consciousness hears that voice, and the tactile consciousness has experience of that body, and then the pleasant feelings are what come. If you don't ever get pleasant feelings, I promise you won't bother. So it's not even the boy that is the point, not even the cake. They're just the means to an end. All we want is the pleasant feelings. So our tragedy is, Buddha's saying, that's the only method we have, isn't it? It's the only method we have to get pleasant feelings. We know because we're embodied beings, which is the five senses, which is the product of past attachment. Attachment over the eons of time kind of began to grow. Penises and vaginas and breasts and eyes and ears and noses. The five senses, in other words. Who do you think created these? Who do you think created boy and girl, penis and vagina? Who do you think created it? Our attachment did, baby children. Not a creator up there giving us a penis and a vagina. We created them karmically. We created these shapes. Our mind created these shapes. We're the boss. We created them. So all of this is because we are convinced that when you get the object, you get happy, because it's the only method we know. This is the tragedy of being in samsara. This is the tragedy of the suffering of attachment, that we are convinced the only way to trigger a happy feeling is to get a cake or a boy or a handbag or whatever it is. That's the only method we know in this embodied body, in this body of the five senses. This is what keeps us locked in samsara, and it's absolute. And this is why we have all-pervasive suffering. You've got the first kind of suffering, which is the suffering of suffering, which is when the unhappy feelings come. Nobody wants that. Then we have the next level of suffering, which is called the suffering of change. And that's what we call happiness, is when we get the happy feelings. Buddha says, sorry, guys, it's a subtler, more pervasive level of suffering, because it turns into suffering of suffering, and it leads to the third one, the all-pervasive suffering. And sort of it's a bit like, if you use attachment as the analogy, the first kind of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants and you have a panic attack of pain. The second kind of suffering is when you get what attachment wants. But the third kind of suffering, it's a bit like attachment is a junkie, is the junkie in us. It's being a junkie. So the first kind is when you don't get the junk. The second kind of suffering is when you get the junk. The third kind of suffering is you're born on this planet that's made of heroin. The world is made of heroin, and you're born in a body of a junkie that demands in order to even exist, you have to ingest the heroin. That's all pervasive suffering, and the junkie is attachment. So we're locked tight in these three levels of suffering, and the attachment's the cause. Of course, ignorance is the root of all of it. So attachment's primordial, you know. So the only method we have now to get happy feelings is to get an object of the senses. That's it. Pretty much, you think about it. Or to use your intelligent mind to fantasize. Then that'll trigger some happy feelings. We're very creative, isn't it? A person who likes watching pornography, you know, sexual pornography on the computer. They're just watching. So it's their mind getting carried away. They're not doing anything, you know, but their body has all these feelings because their mind is very creative. So the only way we know how to trigger pleasant feelings is to do something to do with the senses, isn't it? Pretty much the gross level. So Buddha's saying, hey people, hey guys, I found a method. I found a method of how to get happy feelings. And this is not even Tantra yet. This is Sutra still. I found a method how to get happy feelings all the time. Because happy feelings are natural. They're natural state of your mind when your mind is unencumbered by neuroses. So when your mind is unencumbered by neuroses, even temporarily, you'll have happy feelings. Check your own experience. Check when you were being fairly generous or very kind or very compassionate or loving. You had pleasant feelings. That is a natural state of your mind, because love and compassion and all the virtues are rooted in, they're natural. So then bliss is just, happiness is naturally there. Look at very happy people who are happy no matter what, because they're virtuous. They're not deluded, they're not angry, they're not jealous, they're not resentful. So as soon as we're angry, attachment, jealous, resentful, depressed, happy feelings are out the window. Goodbye happy feelings. There aren't any, there are only unhappy feelings. So the method that Buddha's giving us, and this is in the wisdom wing, this is in high school, not even going to the bodhicitta path yet, not even going to Tantra. This is Buddha's method. He calls it achieving nirvana. He calls it getting out of suffering. He calls it liberation. He calls all these words we, mystify. His method, he says, we think happy feelings are what we get when we get what attachment wants. Attachment is like the boss. Attachment drives everything. Attachment is the hunger. Attachment is, and all joined by the other parts of our mind. Attachment is the hunger. Then we go searching, and then it exaggerates the deliciousness, and then it all kicks in, and we get the object, and then the anticipation, and the waiting for the pleasure, and you put the cake in the mouth, and pleasure is triggered. No argument. But Buddha says we're not happy with that feeling. We're not, as Lama Zopa says, we're not happy with that first feeling. It's the best feeling you're going to get. It's happy. The happy feelings that are generating from now on every time you eat the cake. From that first moment of the first mouthful of the cake, that's the best happy feeling you're going to get from that cake. But we're not satisfied, so that's why we put a second piece in the mouth. And we're still not happy, so we put a third piece in the mouth. And by now we're getting very stressed, because now we're starting to experience unhappy feelings, aren't we? Because we're starting to get full. But we still keep trying. Maybe the next piece will do it. Before you know it, you've got to stop, you'd vomit. This is how we live our lives. Swinging like crazy maniacs between happy and unhappy feelings, using all the wrong methods, bashing our heads against brick walls, totally addicted to this system. Heartbreaking if we understood it. So Buddha says, no, that's not happiness. It is happy, it's better than nothing, but it leads to suffering feelings, because if you keep eating that cake, eventually you want to vomit. So he says, no, 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 that's how you think. That's samsara. That's what samsara means. But I found that happy feelings are what you get, and they won't change into suffering feelings when you've given up attachment. That's it. That's Buddhism. That's what he's saying. It's technical. It's practical. But because it's couched in Indian and Tibetan terminology, and it's couched like religion, we hear it as punitive and heavy and difficult and religious and blah, 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 you know. It's quite precise. So we have to understand what a feeling is. A happy feeling. It's not virtuous. It's not non-virtuous. And this is the trouble. We so conflate it with attachment that it is virtually the same thing for us, but that's completely mistaken. Attachment is the vampire in us, the hungry vampire that drives everything, that leads us to the cake, and then once you've tasted the cake, then the happy feeling is triggered. So happy feeling is neither good nor bad. As Lama used to say, Lama Yeshe was so one, he'd say, the more pleasure, the better, dear, he would say. We kind of get nervous because, oh, it sounds like a sin, you know. Can't talk like pleasure. Happy feeling sounds like nice and modest, but pleasure, that's a bit sort of not sure about that. And this is why Lama Yeshe in his Mahamudra book, so marvelous, so kind, so amazing, Lama Yeshe, you know. In his Mahamudra book, he talks about the qualities that we would accomplish getting single-pointed concentration, this genius technique invented by these amazing Indians well before the Buddha. These miraculous yogis and scholars and great saints before the Buddha. They cultivated this amazing technique called samadhi, technically called shamatha, this state of single-pointed concentration, which is where we've naturally accessed a subtler level of mind, where naturally the sensory consciousnesses and the mental, the gross conceptuality have ceased. This, of course, is positing a state of mind that the West doesn't even posit, the neuroscience hasn't discussed, because they're talking about the brain, you know. So at that level of mind, this is where we get the taste of it. At that level of mind, in single-pointed concentration, because even just temporarily, your gross conceptuality has ceased and your gross senses have ceased, just naturally, you experience bliss. I mean, you've got to hear these words. Naturally, you experience happy feelings, but levels of happy feelings that you can't even conceive of. I mean, anybody who's got a serious meditator, and they'll say, I mean, they usually keep it very private, and that's good. But when I interviewed Venerable Rene back in the 90s, this marvelous Swiss monk, we've invited, but he keeps saying he's busy, doesn't he, Charmaine? Charmaine's gone, hasn't she? Anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so anyway, he's been a serious meditator for years and years and years. And back in the 90s, I interviewed him in Mandala magazine. I'm sure I've told you this before. So he did a kind of one of his serious 2.5-year retreats. He'd been a monk by that point by about 10 years, I think, 8 years. He'd been seriously meditating, studying, he'd been living in vows, all of this. And he was living at Ling, the place of clear light, this lovely center of Lama Yeshes and Lama Zopas up in the Sierra Nevada, near Granada. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama was there in 82, and he blessed it, called it Place of Clear Light, Ling. So Rene, I interviewed him a couple of years later at Kopan Monastery about that retreat. He was doing single-pointed concentration. And as we know in the text, it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. So he maybe said, I maybe touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages, he said. And he said there was no question, whatever the words were, he said something like, there's no question that the joy I experienced in his mind, naturally, it was joy, happy feelings, the joy I experienced was so superior to any pleasure I've ever had through my senses. And this is the point. As Lama Yeshe says, in the beginning, the joy you experience in your meditation, as your mind gets more subtle, is physical, but eventually it becomes purely mental. Of course, that we just can't conceptualize. Because the other point about it, right now, we can see, because of this body of ours, this big bag of bones, this gross body, that our mind has to kind of work with, it's such an obstacle. Any pleasure we do experience through our senses, that's usually the only way we can get pleasure. Or if we've got a clever creative mind, watching the porn, you can do that. But see my point. The pleasure we have is very gross. It's not being moralistic, it's just fact. It's very gross, very heavy, and it's very berserk. Your mind goes berserk. Even with the slightest attachment to a piece of cake, if you're really hungry, the mind is really agitated. The attachment makes you very agitated. So the joy we experience is like berserk joy. But anybody who has any experience in meditation, I mean serious, proper meditation, proper experience, would all say the joy is super, super calm. It's utterly peaceful because the agitated mind is not functioning, the agitated delusions and the conceptuality and the senses. So we live at a very gross level of our mind. So this whole approach in the sutra practices then, and this practice of getting renunciation, giving up suffering and its causes, the essence of this is giving up attachment. So as Lama Yeshe says, you've got renunciation, which is the completion of sort of, not the completion totally, but the first of these three principal aspects of the path, the first level of the wisdom wing, junior school and high school. You've got renunciation of suffering and its causes. When just the thought of another moment of attachment is so disgusting. I've heard him say two different things. One was, it's like using used toilet paper. And the other one he said is, it's like being in a septic tank. So think about this. Our minds are driven by attachment. We can't even recognize it. It drives every millisecond of what we think and do and say. That's how primordially deep it is. So be humble and patient. But, you know, to the point where you do have this renunciation, which means such a profound understanding of attachment and its suffering that it causes, that's pretty advanced, you know. That's pretty advanced. So way to go, people. What time is it? 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Okay. Okay. So let me just conclude something here. Then I want some questions from you. We haven't got to Tantra yet, but we're preparing ourselves for it. And therefore for understanding Tantra, therefore understanding Tara, how these practices work. Okay, maybe now. Why about my computer? Don't start. Gosh. Okay, never mind. Talk to me, people. Ask me some questions if you have any about what I've said. Just about what I've said. Oh, it's working now. Just about what I've said, okay? Any questions, people?
Okay, John Kavanaugh, go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. If you can hear me, okay. Okay. Yeah. So when you were talking about the human manifestation prior to us in the light form,
eons ago before this.
Eons ago.
They described the human birth. Yes, John.
Yep. Okay. Is that more akin to how we should be perceiving Tara and the manifestations when we're doing the Vajra practice?
You know, it's a very good point. I'll tell you, that's a very good point. Let me explain. It's just, yes, in many ways, you could argue, you could say that level of mind that we would have experienced back then, and our physical elements would have been much more subtle, and we had like a subtle light body, which would be similar to, you know, the deities at the subtle level, which we'll talk about in depth later. The enjoyment body of the deity, which is the Tara's body and all those Buddha's bodies, they are made of subtle light, but you'd say they're a million times more pure because there's no delusions there, but it's similar to that, or it's similar to even to a God realm, which is part of samsara, where your energies are very subtle, and therefore the mind is very radiant. So it's a similarity, yes, but we'll go into more detail exactly what it means, the Buddha's subtle body, the enjoyment body. We'll discuss that later. Yeah, perfect. Good, John.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, people, what else? Any other questions? No, it's okay then. So my computer's working again. I'd rather use the computer. I'm going to whip off again off my iPad and go back to the computer. I'll see you in a tick. Back again. Thank you, Mary. All right, let's continue. So do we have any more questions, folks? Any more questions, my dear people, before I continue?
Venerable Robina, Kim, who has an iPhone, has a question.
Good, wonderful. Talk to me, Kim.
Hi. I don't have an iPhone, but that's okay.
Okay.
I guess I've read in the book too by Lama Yeshe the description of attachment and used toilet paper or septic tank, and I've thought about it for a long time, and it's really disgusting, obviously, but I think about it, and I'm in samsara, and then I start resisting things that would normally give me pleasure, which isn't working. Because I don't have an alternative. Like, I'm not enlightened or...
No, but that's not the right analysis. That's like saying, oh, I'm in grade 2 of music, but I'm not at Bach yet, so that nothing's working. You've got to go to grade 2. You've got no choice. So you're leaping ahead of yourself, Kimberly. You're expecting more than you should. We've got to first do the analysis of exactly what attachment is and know precisely what it is. I mean, in the monastic university system, they study several years the model of the mind. If we don't study that, you won't know what attachment is. We can hear what Lama Zopa says, but that doesn't help us if we don't know precisely what it is and how it differs precisely from the virtuous states of mind. This is quite a technical explanation. So one step at a time, honey. One step at a time.
So there's the attachment part of, say, reaching for the cake or whatever gives you pleasure. And that's so fine. I've noticed the attachment portion of that experience.
Well, okay, well, what do you think attachment means? What part of your mind do you think it's referring to, sweetheart? Well, tell me exactly what you think.
It's the fantasy mind that gets overly excited about obtaining that object, and so it's kind of a build-up, but there's something kind of for me, there's something unsettling about the subtlety of that experience. Actually doesn't feel very virtuous, but I skip over.
Correct. So then so you're going in the right direction. You're doing beautifully. That's fine. What's your problem?
Well, it kind of makes everything that used to be kind of nice sort of icky. And
well, good. That's part of the process of giving it up, isn't it? But you don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater, honey. You learn to be very precise. You learn to know that what attachment is and how it's over-exaggerating, how it drives us, how it causes us to get all eager and excitement, and how it causes us to anticipate, how it causes us to manipulate to get it, how it causes us to exaggerate its deliciousness. All of this, you learn to observe the process. So the more you're observing the process, the more you can still, there's ways of then redeeming that action. If you're going to eat the cake, you're more subdued. You don't just shove it in mindlessly. You can then make a little offering. And that way you bless. There's many methods we can use to mitigate it, which is very sensible, very practical. That's why you understand.
I don't know if you're going to go over that in our course, but I'd love to.
But that's all part of the practice of being a Buddhist. You have all these other ways, there's methods. I mean, you've got to describe the problem first, and then you've got to describe given. So for example, let's say the very first level of practice, if you discover that you really like to steal all the time, you just got to quit that one. Whether it makes you miserable or not, best for you to quit it, because that'll keep creating more suffering for you. That's the obvious one. You at least control the servants of attachment, the servants of anger. But no, it doesn't say don't eat any cake. At the first level, it's mainly Buddha suggesting that we refrain from actions that harm others, that are driven by anger and attachment. That's the first level of practice. You get a bit of ethics. So that takes work. It's hard. If you're addicted to jumping on 14 girls or boys every day, it's quite difficult to not do it. It's going to be a struggle, but that's all part of it. Just if you're going to go to the gym and get fit, it's going to demand a lot of struggle, but we don't mind that struggle because we know the result is worth it. It's the same here, sweetheart. So it's one step at a time. We begin to control our body and speech first. Harness that. Don't jump on too many bodies. And then you're going to start to deduce from that, well, also jumping on too many bits of cake won't be so good for me either. It's not moralistic, it's practical. So it's a gradual process. And then as you develop a Buddhist practice, you have your visualization of the Buddha, you do a little prayer, you visualize it as empty, or you offer it to somebody, you offer it in your mind to the Buddha. Once you've taken refuge, you get these little practices. So it grows as you develop your practice. Do you understand?
Yeah, I do. I guess what I found myself doing, like not to the extreme now, but maybe like 6 months ago, was that I was avoiding experiences of pleasure. So I wasn't allowing myself to just enjoy.
Okay, so but it depends on the experience. Give me an example of experience. I don't want to be too personal, but what are you talking about?
It was kind of extreme. Like I would look out at the beautiful view out my window. And instead of just enjoying the natural beauty that was there, I was thinking how it was empty, essentially. And
okay, you're chucking the baby out for the bathwater, baby.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused.
I know, well, that's right. So that's why you have to, like anything, if you don't learn math properly, you'll get confused. If you don't learn botany properly, you'll get confused. So if you want the Buddha's view and you're talking like you want to understand it, you need to study it, sweetheart. There's no that's it, but don't panic. It's all right. One step at a time.
Okay.
one step at a time. It takes time, all this. It's quite subtle because there's so many things going on in our mind all at once. So there's your eye consciousness seeing a pretty shape and color. Your mental consciousness calls it beautiful. Then your attachment kicks in and exaggerates it. And then all of this, because you're seeing it as more delicious, then it triggers a happy feeling. And then you chuck the whole lot out. So we've got to be very refined in the way we do it. So there is a method when first you've got to recognize these parts of your mind, which is you're doing, which is marvelous. So in the beginning, you've got to be cautious, and you're being cautious. That's good. But eventually, one catches the mind, whether it's the pretty cake or the pretty person or the pretty sight, and you observe and you know the workings of your mind. You know how you've studied the mind, and you know that the mental consciousness is describing it as beautiful. You call it that. Somebody else will call it ugly. And then attachment kicks in and makes it look more delicious than it is. And then all this triggers a pleasant feeling. You know all these different pieces. So you're able to navigate it all. And then you're able to say, well, this is why it is empty, but don't chuck the baby out of the bathwater. It's a dependent arising. And mainly it's a dependent arising because you decided to call it beautiful. It's not beautiful intrinsically. All of that thinking can help you. And then you'll enjoy it all the more because there's no grasping at it. And that's where you have to recognize that pleasure is not attachment. They're separate parts of our mind. It's almost impossible to see this because they're just triggered at the same time. Pleasure is neither good nor bad. That's why Lama Yeshe would joke but be serious, the more pleasure, the better, dear. That's why people in single point of concentration, when their attachment is subdued, have unbelievable joy, but it's not grasping, it's not greedy, it's not based on attachment. So it's peaceful. Joy is the natural state of your mind, but we have to do all this navigating by studying it and understanding it technically and watching our minds like a hawk. Do you understand, darling?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about pleasure.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. One step at a time. So this is the first stages of practice because we're driven right now by attachment and we're completely out of control. Like Lama says, we're berserk. We have no control. We have no idea about all these parts of our mind. We just have this seamless experience of there's a cake and shove it in the mouth. There's no analysis. There's no understanding of the various parts of the mind. Like I just said then, we have no understanding. We can't, even theoretically, we can know this, but to actually, as you see the cake, you can't recognize the discrimination, the intention, the attention, the concentration, the mindfulness, the pleasure, the attachment. There's a dozen parts of our mind, like many parts of your hand, all working together to have the experience of holding a cup. Well, there are many parts of our mind all working together to have that moment of experience. We have to do this inner analysis. This is what's brilliant about Buddhist psychology. It's so technical and precise. It's amazing. And we have to study it. There's no shortcut. If you don't study biology, you will not understand how your fingers work. If you don't study botany, you don't know how gardens work. It's the same here. But we don't think of Buddhism like that. We think it's just sit there and watch your mind and be mindful and something will happen. You know, we're very superstitious. That's a good point, Kimberly. Thank you. What else, darling people?
Venerable, there's two questions in chat. One is from TH on her iPhone, and then one is from Mary Jo Whiteman.
Good, go on. Please talk.
Hi, Venerable Robina.
Hello, darling.
Talk as usual, all of your talks. And I really love what you said. We're all junkies in a world full of heroin. And it's it's related to the last speaker's question about the difference between pleasure and attachment.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we're starting out and we're obviously not at the point where we can distinguish the two.
That's right, exactly.
So like, as you said, we need to be cautious. We need to protect ourselves more. Yeah. And so what are environments, I mean, all of samsara is not safe, but are there environments that are more conducive to us?
Give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, become a monk or a nun and go live in a monastery, darling. It's sort of like that's the literal answer, but understand the meaning of that. So naturally, if you're a junkie, you need to keep away from heroin. It's not blaming heroin because our attachment is so enormous. We know perfectly well there's no way in the universe we can begin to understand attachment to heroin until we remove ourselves from heroin. Alcohol, that boy you can't stop shouting at. So even the anger that's triggered, if one person triggers your anger so strongly, you remove yourself from him. So we have to watch ourselves like a hawk and try and get some environment that's fairly reasonable. So if you really want to give up attachment, you've got to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not even just go to the monastery, go to the mountains. I mean, but you need to be qualified to do that. And that's talking you know, literally, then when you're in, and so it's because attachment is such a junkie, whenever there's anything there, it'll leap onto it. So if you don't have the object there, the mind has got some chance to calm down. That's the miracle of doing a retreat, even for 2 days, to remove yourself from all the usual agitated objects. Your mind is beginning to get some space, you know. If attachment hasn't got an object, sure, the mind is pretty berserk and you'll keep thinking about it, but eventually the mind calms down. So this is the ideal scenario. That's why we have to be cautious, sweetheart, and do our best in this crazy world. And be intelligent and know what environments are good for us, know what people are good for us, know what things are good for us. It really does demand we really watch ourselves like a hawk. It's very responsible. Do you see my point, sweetheart?
Yes, thank you.
And it's not that easy to find it in this crazy world, which is just driven by attachment. Of course it is. But that's where you can see the tragedy when we don't have any awareness. This typical world, we have no awareness. So there we are, born with a lot of attachment. We wonder why we become a junkie at the age of 15. We don't know why. And then we're surrounded by everybody else being a junkie at the age of 15. Of course, we're going to sink into it and die. We have no self-consciousness. We have no awareness. We have no understanding of what works and what the problems are. We have no way to analyze it. It's just the tragedy. And it's marvelous we can become conscious and start to be adult about it and give ourselves the conditions that are conducive for our mind. I mean, a good example for me is so simple. We had a big family, 7 children. Well, they're 8. Well, they weren't really 8, but one of them died. 7 daughters and a son. Anyway, we were very close in age. My mother had about 8 babies in 9 years, so we're all about the same age now. So when we're all these little children, we're quite poor. We had to share beds, and there's lots of berserk and chaotic, and they're all like me. They all talk fast. And my brother doesn't. He's the most quiet one in the family, I think. Not sure. He's the last one. He came at the end of 7 girls. All like me. Can you imagine the poor thing? Anyway, this busy berserk family, all very loving. We all love each other still. We're all very harmonious, but lots of energy and lots of kind of craziness in the family. My daddy wasn't the best daddy. So berserk, completely berserk. And I mean, me in a berserk environment was double berserk, right? I was a bully. I'd beat up my sisters. I was mean. We had to share beds. My poor sisters, 2 of them got asthma. When we were rotated and I had to sleep with Judy or Julie, I'd probably suffocate them with a pillow because I couldn't handle all the asthma. I mean, it was my struggle. So I was mean to my poor sisters, you know. I was berserk. I was rude. I was angry. Berserk. Now, I had no concept then of my anger, and I had no concept of all the things that triggered my anger. Not blaming anybody. But I got so naughty at one point when I was about 12 or 13, which is also at the same time that I was holy, and I can never work that out, the 2 parts of me living together. I wanted to be a nun, and I was naughty. So my mother got so upset with me, she sent me off to boarding school, the same school as what I went to all my life, 12 years, and I had to live there. Well, this is not my point now. I was suddenly in a completely different environment. There was strict, disciplined, mass every morning. I was in bliss. I knew the whole mass in Latin. The discipline, I had my own little alcove, not even a room. It was like a miracle. We had a dormitory and we were divided into alcoves. We had a curtain. We even learned to fold the curtain in the right way. I remember that too. So I had my own bed and my own little alcove. It was like heaven on earth. But all those years up until then, I didn't know what I was missing. I didn't know what I needed to calm my mind down. My mother didn't either. She was so overwhelmed by keeping everything above water. We had no money. She sent us to the most expensive Catholic convent. She still owes the bills 70 years later. I'm sure she's dead. But this is the point. I was not conscious when I was little. I read all about God and the saints, but I didn't know why. I didn't know how to protect myself because I had no choice. We had 2 bedrooms, 6 beds, 7 children, berserk. So, but suddenly I get sent to boarding school and I was in bliss. I can't describe to you. I changed into a saint overnight because the conditions changed. So this is where we have to become conscious. And half the world, I mean, I always talk about how 40% of all women on earth who get murdered, it's the man in the same bed who murders her. This is not blaming men. This is blaming how we are unconscious and don't understand our mind and don't understand how conducive conditions, what conditions we need to begin to grow as human beings. And this is the first level of practice, getting some awareness and knowing what our tendencies are, knowing what our weaknesses are, knowing our delusions, and so protecting ourselves. This shows real grown up, you know. We begin to grow up already from junior school. But that was a miracle to me. I remember it vividly. I couldn't even articulate it then, what it was. This is what I've needed, my own room, my own space, discipline. You know, I passed exams for the first time. I went to mass every morning. I was a completely different person. It was amazing. I'll never forget. That's the conditions. And that's the first stages we have to recognize, you know. So important, TH. What else do people? Any more questions? Yeah.
Mary Jo Whiteman has a question. Mary Jo, just please unmute.
Good, darling. Talk to me, Mary Jo.
Hi. Yes. Good morning. Thank you. This has already been so very helpful. And some of my questions, I think, have kind of morphed into comments maybe. But so I was just having the idea, it seems like in most of our normal world, we can assume that almost everything is an attachment. And it seems to me like maybe my my exploration has to do with looking at, well, the hummingbirds, for example. I always look forward to their arrival and so forth and so on. But and I'm pretty attached to their coming here. I would be very disturbed if they did not show up. They've showed up for 30 years.
Mary Jo, you know, you're absolutely right. So this first level of practice is kind of brutal. It's learning botany for the first time and suddenly realizing that our garden is full of weeds and flowers and we've never known how to distinguish them. So we wondered why we always get sick. So we first have to be very strict in our analysis and realize that is a herb, that is a weed. I'm going to keep distant from those weeds. But as we progress, Mary Jo, and this is where I'm moving to Tantra, where when we become so sophisticated in our botany, we are able to use the weeds as medicine. But you've got to first recognize it. And in the beginning stages, like Kimberly said, you've got to be very cautious. That's good. We need to know. But as we progress in knowing about attachment, understanding it ever more and learn to harness it, when then we get even to the Bodhisattva path, we can start to use attachment on the Bodhisattva path. And then by the time we get to Tantra, we're totally qualifying. We can use poison as medicine. Are you seeing what I'm saying, Mary Jo? The whole process I'm going through.
Yes, I do. I do. That's wonderful.
Don't suck the baby out with the bathwater, Mary Jo, because you're a practitioner. You can see that it's attachment, and you know you get upset if they didn't come, but you be skillful. And then when the pleasure arises, you offer the hummingbirds and you offer the pleasure to the Buddha. Straight away, you create billions of virtuous karma. So you can have your cake and eat it too, baby. That's even just in the Mahayana, in the Bodhisattva path. You offer the joy, you offer the birds, you offer your food, you offer the pleasure. That's what's miraculous. But if in the beginning we're so demented and we're drowning in the attachment, we can't even see the possibility of offering. So as we progress, we're able to do that. Then you get the best of both worlds going.
Yes, that's great. But it feels also like it is not, it's not like you put on these special glasses and you see clearly. It's, you know, you kind of have to, well, somebody like me, I stumble around and bumble around, and I guess that's a part of it.
That's how we all are, Mary Jo. We're doing our best, don't you worry.
Yeah. So so this is very helpful. And I had a question I wanted to ask regarding, and it's kind of a personal experience I had, but regarding anger and something you mentioned early on this morning about anger carrying many karmic seeds with it, I believe is what you had said. And, you know, I've working and with my anger, and I don't have nearly as much, at least it's so obvious. But the other day, for whatever reason, I do not know, I was just flooded with it. And I didn't know exactly how to work with it, except I tried to zip my lips the best I could.
Well, that's good. That's working with the darling. Was it? Yeah. Was anger with a particular person? Was it?
No, it was not a person. It was not a circumstance. It was just this energy, and it was uncomfortable. And it felt really manicky, and I don't have a lot of manickiness ordinarily, but and it's interesting. I had been sending prayers for a particular person who was dealing with what I think I was feeling, and I don't know if that was connected or not. But
well, you know, Mary Jo, this is a very interesting discussion. Let me do my little bit of analysis here based on what you've said. First of all, when we say we're being angry, what that means is the habit is there that when attachment doesn't get what it wants, aversion arises, and aversion is the bare bones state of mind that then turns into anger. How dare that be? That is wrong. That's not what I want. So anger is just this habit, and usually it's triggered by some external event or something you think about. But sometimes, Mary Jo, when we are practicing, we can experience our delusions in a shocking way that seem to come out of nowhere. And this is a sign, Mary Jo, of success. Let me explain. We have to learn to see the difference. When you go to the gym, you go to get healthy, but believe me, when you come back on the first and the second and the third day, you feel worse than you felt before. But we all know, Mary Jo, that it's a good sign, not a bad one. So it's the same here,